So last night I saw Killers of the Flower Moon, the new film by Martin Scorsese. And this is already one of my favorite movies of the year. It is so good. And there's a lot to talk about in terms of the history, culture, symbolism, and themes. And we'll dive deeply into all of that. I very carefully researched a lot for this one, but please feel free to correct me if you think I'm missing anything. So to break this movie down, we're going to use 3 themes. 1, the flower-killing moon. We'll discuss the history leading into these events, the meaning of the title of the film, the concern of the children's skin color, and Molly's mother's frustration. 2, power of self-deception. We'll discuss Hale's ignorance, Ernest's inner conflict, Ernest's racial outburst, and Ernest's love for Molly. And 3, resilience of spirit. We'll discuss Molly's love for Ernest, why Molly stayed with Ernest for so long, and the ending with the theater performance scene and the traditional Osage dance, and much more. And if you like this video, please leave a thumbs up and a comment. It helps so much. And if you want to see more of these, please make sure to subscribe as well. Let's get started. Theme number 1, the flower-killing moon. I think the best way to begin this analysis is to go over a bit of the history and backstory leading into the events of the film in the 1920s. So according to an article in the Oklahoman, in the 1870s, the Osage became the only indigenous nation to buy its own reservation. And a quarter century later, oil was discovered under this land that the tribe owned. So in the 1920s, oil production in the Osage Nation was of course booming, and the Osage became the richest people per capita in the world. As you would suspect, when white Americans heard about this, they began integrating into what we see in the film as Osage County, to somehow get a piece of the Osage wealth and success. Unfortunately, it became extremely easy for white people to steal from the Osage, because federal law, state law, and local law were frankly discriminatory when it came to the rights of indigenous people. As you see in the film, the crimes against the Osage were not investigated caringly or thoroughly, so some of the white people felt inclined to take what they wanted, whether they were taking goods or taking lives. Often when the Osage are very clearly killed, in the conclusion of the investigation, murder is never considered, and it's never mentioned. And I think this provides enough solid ground for us to discuss the title of the film, Killers of the Flower Moon. The Osage have a symbolic moon to represent each of the months. For example, February is the light of day returns moon, referring to the approaching spring season and the longer days. April is the planting moon, referring to the time of the year when new seeds are planted. And May is the flower-killing moon, which I can best explain using a quote from the book that this movie is based on, with the same title, Killers of the Flower Moon. In May, when coyotes howl beneath an unnervingly large moon, taller plants such as spiderworts and black-eyed Susans begin to creep over the tinier blooms. The necks of the smaller flowers and their petals flutter away, and before long, they are buried underground. This is why the Osage refer to May as the time of the flower-killing moon. The movie describes the flower moon in a brighter and more positive way, referring to the flowers as pieces of the moon that have fallen down. And I'm sure that is relevant to the heritage. But ultimately, the title, Killers of the Flower Moon, is a slight play on the term flower-killing moon, referring to the cultural belief of the monthly moons, but also the horrific events in this movie. Just like the smaller flowers, the Osage had their resources taken out from under them by new plants inhabiting the field, referring to the white people. And on top of all of this, May is the month marking the beginning of this series of brutal murders orchestrated by William Hale, Robert De Niro's character. And all of this nature-related symbolism refers to the slow, sinister, calculated invasion and theft from the innocent. It ties in with not only the major actions depicted in the film, but also the systemic oppression over indigenous people. And we see that actually depicted in little moments throughout this movie. For example, probably the most eerie depiction of it when the 2 white grandparents are discussing the skin tone of their 2 half-Osage grandchildren, and how the family is fortunately, collectively, slowly getting lighter. It's like the first step of their macro systemic plan to take over and erase those that once were. And on the other side of this issue, this is a big reason why Molly's mother, Lizzie, is frustrated by all her daughter's romantic interest in white men. At her age, she has a greater awareness and wisdom of their historical wrongdoings when integrating with indigenous communities. Theme number 2, power of self-deception. Self-deception is one of the most prevalent and recurring themes in this whole movie. And the reason why I say this is because it exists within all 3 of our main characters, and it drives the majority of their decisions in this story. And I, of course, want to discuss all three characters, so let's start with Hale. Hale is a living, breathing, human embodiment of dishonesty. He's dishonest with his family, his friends, his closest white accomplices, and of course, the Osage community. And what fuels this dishonesty is his ignorance and his belief in his own lies. And to dig a little deeper into that, I want to quote an interview with Robert De Niro when asked about what the motivation was behind the actions of his character, William Hale. I feel that he did love the Osage, or thought he loved them, but somehow felt entitled to do what he did. I know he knew that he was doing something wrong, but rationalized to himself that he was doing it for some greater good, whatever that is. And this makes perfect sense to me. Hale lives a lie and believes in it. It's almost psychopathic. He justifies his cruel actions by considering the vulnerability of the Osage, which is as ironic of a motivation as you can possibly have. He's basically saying, if the wealth should end up with someone else when the Osage die, which they often do because they're manipulated and neglected, it should end up with me because I deserve it the most. I'm closest to them, and I need to guarantee that by any means necessary. And this exact motivation is perfectly encapsulated in this quote from his conversation with Ernest after Minnie's sudden passing. It shows itself to you that Bill Smith didn't take proper care of Minnie the way he could have. To have her sick and die, take her head rights and her land, that oil that should go to her sister, which is your wife, he's taking money that by rights should go to Molly. He's positioning himself as this protector of Molly's family from people like Bill Smith, when also he's instructing Ernest to do the exact same thing. And this delusional, ignorant thinking ties in with the mentality of the white people of Osage County and the federal laws governing the Osage people. The best example of this is the federal mandate requiring all Osage people to have a financial guardian to keep hold of and manage their money, because they are incapable of managing their own wealth for no apparent or given reason. Just because they're Osage, they're incapable. And this was the law. Now let's move on to Ernest. Ernest is torn between two opposing motivations: the love of his wife and children and the psychological conditioning of his lineage. Ernest comes from a culture where his people believe they are superior over others. It's deeply embedded in his mind, no matter how kind or charming he may be at times. We see this prejudiced mentality revealed when he has an outburst of frustration when Molly won't take her insulin shot. He mocks her, her people, her culture, and her traditions, all in one genuine moment of rage. However, the truth is that Ernest does truly love Molly, and he justifies many of his own cruel actions by convincing himself that it's for the well-being of him and Molly. Even when he is slowly killing her with poisoned insulin shots, he convinces himself that it's just to slow her down momentarily and quiet her down until all of this madness passes. And poetically, nearing the end of the film, this truth about the poison is the one truth he himself can still not admit to himself and his wife, even after coming clean about everything else in court. That truth hurts him the most to accept, so he simply refuses to accept it. And finally, I need to move on to Molly, the heart and soul of this story, and our only truly virtuous main character. But for me to get into her form of self-deception, I need to move into theme number 3, resilience of spirit. Very interestingly, the film narratively decides to revolve around the most peculiar element of the entire true story: the relationship between Molly and Ernest. Having heard about the true story, and even after seeing this movie, you may ask yourself, why did Molly trust Ernest in the first place? And furthermore, why did she stay with him when she suspected that he was keeping secrets about her family members' murders? Well, to answer the first question, Molly loved Ernest, and she could feel it from him that he loved her as well. Also, Ernest's uncle, Hale, was someone Molly trusted because he was so close with the Osage people. She couldn't see what he was planning behind the scenes. And when Minnie suggests that Ernest wants Molly's money, Rita chimes in and says, his uncle has money. If it's not money he wants, he loves you. But the issue is, Rita and Molly may not yet be familiar with the insatiable greed that exists within people like Hale and even Ernest. Especially when Rita and Molly were brought up in a culture where gratitude for the simplest things, like family, togetherness, and the natural world, are some of the very most important values. Also, if Molly trusts Ernest, she doesn't have to depend on other white people to manage her finances. As Leonardo DiCaprio says in an interview, the Osage were considered incompetent at the time, and they weren't in charge of their own wealth. By getting a caretaker like Ernest as her husband, they became an independent unit. They were able to take care of one another. And as all these murders began to take place, Molly held tighter onto Ernest for physical protection and emotional support. Even when Molly suspected that Ernest was keeping secrets, she was willing to look past the truth of her suspicion. Because every time Molly lost a family member, he was more and more the only thing she had left. It is only when Ernest feels the pain of Molly's loss, when his child is sick and passes away, that he has a change of heart and finally testifies against Hale. The ending of the film is a radio theater performance acting as an epilogue to the movie, describing the events in real life following the events that are in this movie. Many other true FBI stories had performances like this in real life. The purpose of this scene taking place here is to emphasize that we often forget about the magnitude of tragedies like this and use it for light entertainment. Like, the value of it exists in how fascinating or shocking it is, not a discussion of the greater issues that caused such horrific events and, how we can solve it. Tragedy becomes the grist for the mill of entertainment, as Scorsese describes in an interview talking about this scene. The scene also emphasizes who these criminals truly were at heart. Hale is described as still believing he is an ally to the Osage Nation, writing to them and loving them from his cell. Again, still buying into his own self-deception. Ernest is described to have still deeply loved his wife and kids, even considering all of the horrific things he was a part of. They also, unfortunately, were released a lot earlier than their initial sentences. Martin Scorsese himself also shows up at the end of this performance to speak about Molly's obituary, where he says, "There was no mention of the murders," calling back to the beginning of the film, indicating that this is still an ongoing issue. And I like to believe it also means that the brutality and tragedy won't follow Molly and her family into the next world. They left it behind. And I think that idea is symbolized beautifully earlier in the film when Lizzie walks off peacefully with her ancestors after getting up out of her deathbed. The very final shot is a traditional Osage dance called Ilonchka. It's a ceremonial dance signifying the end of factionalism and feuding between tribes, ultimately encouraging peace and togetherness. It's the perfect final word for the film. The flower lives on. Alright, that's my analysis. Subscribe for weekly videos and please send me your recommendations. And please let me know what you thought about Killers of the Flower Moon. I'd love to talk about it. Thank you so much for watching. See you later.